Hey everyone, welcome back. I've always been fascinated by Dr. Gabor Mate.
Oh yeah, he's a
And
fascinating guy.
yeah, his work on trauma and addiction is really eye-opening. And lately he's been speaking out a lot about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Mm.
So today we're going to do a deep dive into Dr. Mate's views on this complex issue and what it means for understanding this conflict through a trauma-informed lens.
Sounds good.
When I think about Dr. Mate, one quote always comes to mind.
Okay.
He said, Trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you.
That's deep.
It is,
Yeah.
and it really sums up the core of his work.
Yeah.
He doesn't just see trauma as a single event, but it's something that can deeply affect us throughout our lives.
Right. And that perspective is so crucial, especially when you consider his background.
Absolutely. I mean, being a Holocaust survivor himself,
Yeah.
he brings such a unique and profound understanding of human suffering to the table.
Exactly. And you can see that reflected in all his work, but particularly when he talks about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
You're right. So let's talk about that. How do you think his personal experiences shape his view of this specific conflict?
Well, I think it gives him a deep empathy for both sides,
Hmm.
He understands what it's like to be persecuted and to feel like your existence is threatened.
Yeah.
But it's also important to remember that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is incredibly complex.
It is.
And it's been going on for decades with a lot of historical baggage on both sides.
Absolutely. So how does Dr. Matei approach this without oversimplifying it?
Well, that's where things get a bit,
Tricky.
yeah, a little bit tricky.
Okay.
Some people argue that he frames the conflict too much in terms of oppressor versus oppressed,
Right.
which they say can overlook the nuances and the historical complexities.
I see what you mean. It's like using a trauma lens to look at one specific aspect,
Exactly.
but not necessarily seeing the whole picture.
Right. And there's been instances where his pronouncements seem to lean more towards one narrative.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Remember during his 80th birthday celebration,
Yeah, I read about that.
he talked about how much he enjoyed the Palestinian food and friendships he experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And, while that's perfectly fine on the surface,
Yeah.
some people saw it as a political statement.
Especially given the context of the ongoing conflict.
Exactly. And that's where I think it's important to talk about the role of expertise.
Okay.
Dr. Mate is brilliant when it comes to trauma and addiction.
Nobody's arguing with that.
But is that expertise enough to make pronouncements on such a complex geopolitical situation?
That's a really good question.
Right. Does his background as a Holocaust survivor give him a different kind of authority when speaking about this conflict?
I mean, it definitely adds weight to his words,
Absolutely.
but it also raises the question of whether he might be overstepping the boundaries of his expertise.
It's a tough one for sure, but I think it's a conversation worth having.
Definitely. I mean, his intentions seem to come from a place of compassion.
Yeah.
But how do we reconcile that with the potential for oversimplification?
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And it's something that we all need to be mindful of, not just when it comes to Dr. Mate,
Mhm.
but anytime a public figure weighs in on something outside their area of expertise,
Right.
especially on something as sensitive as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Absolutely. So where do we go from here? I mean,
Well, that's
how can people like Dr. Mate use their platform effectively without potentially exacerbating tensions?
Yeah. How can we use these trauma-informed perspectives to promote understanding and peace?
Well, I think one thing is to maybe focus less on taking sides
Okay.
and more on fostering dialogue.
I like that.
Create spaces where people can share their experiences and perspectives without judgment.
Yeah, I think Dr. Mate is brilliant at creating those kinds of spaces in his work on trauma and addiction.
He is. And imagine if he could apply those same skills to facilitating conversations about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
That would be incredible.
It would. It's not about silencing voices or denying the pain and suffering on both sides.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the complexities and working towards understanding and healing.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is
Yeah,
it's not about dismissing Dr. Mate's views or saying he shouldn't speak out.
exactly.
It's about encouraging a more nuanced approach
Yes.
that considers all sides of the story.
And recognizes the limitations of applying a purely trauma-informed lens to a situation that's also deeply political and historical.
Right. This has been a really thought-provoking deep dive,
It has.
and it's definitely made me think about how we can all engage in these difficult conversations
Yeah.
in a way that is both compassionate and informed.
It's a challenge for sure.
It is. But I think it's a challenge worth taking on.
I agree.
And it's made me wonder,
What's that?
How can we all use our own unique experiences and knowledge to contribute to a more peaceful and understanding world?
That's a great question to leave our listeners with.
It is, isn't it? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive,
Thanks for having me.
and we hope you'll continue to explore these issues with us.
We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.